Hey, welcome to Three Count Commentaries. This is your host, Mongo Slade. Today, we're going to celebrate the life of Bruce Reed, aka Butch Reed, one of the most underrated professional wrestlers of all time. So, let's get started. Bruce Franklin Reed was born July the 11th, 1954, and he passed February 5th, 2021, following heart complications. He had suffered two heart attacks in January of 2021, but didn't die until February. As a child, Bruce Reed wasn't really a wrestling fan. He didn't have access to it. So he played football and he played a little basketball. He went to a small college called the University of Central Missouri and played from 1973 to 1975. Then he played at Northeast Oklahoma A&M where he played football. There were some issues with his ankles and knees, which kept him from being drafted in the NFL. But so he walked on to play for the Kansas City Chiefs. He played for about a year, and he says he only made about $25,000 to $30,000 at the time. While walking into a bar, walking into Bob Geigel's bar rather, he got into wrestling. Ronnie Etchison had seen him and decided to train him, and they trained at Lord Littlebrook's gym. He said he trained twice a week for a year before he was sent to Canada to work a loop at All Canadian Pro Wrestling for Al Tomko and Gene Kiniski. He worked there for a year, and he said he didn't have a gimmick. This was in 1979. He didn't have a gimmick. He was just going by Bruce Reed. From there, he moved to Central States, which is the Kentucky and Georgia area, where he was mentored by Harley Race and Rufus Jones and Ernie Ladd. You know, these are just some of the names that he mentioned as being mentors to him. In this territory, he teamed up with Jacques Rougeau, who was the Mountie, and is actually was wrestling under the name Jerry Roberts. They were the former tag team champions in Central States. Florida is where he got his big break. And somewhere it's about 81 or 82, he ended up in Florida, where he was one of the top guys in Florida under the Funks and Dusty. Famously, he was a regular tag team partner with Dusty Rhodes, and he did 1 hour Broadways with Ric Flair chasing the NWA World Heavyweight Championship. He was a really big star. This is where he picked up the nickname Hacksaw, where he got from the Dory and Terry Funk. From Florida, he moved down south to Louisiana, where he worked for Bill Watts in Mil South Wrestling. And this is where he really felt comfortable. This, his later part of his life, he would say this was his favorite promotion to work for, because this is where he really made. Even though he was becoming a star in Florida, and he was a really big star in Florida, this is where he felt like he really broke the mold. This is where for quite a while, he was the protege of the Junkyard Dog, and then over time, it became more of a jealousy thing for Butch Reed, and he actually started to turn on the Junkyard Dog. If you listen to interviews, he talks about how nobody believed that two black guys can main event shows in the South, because nobody wanted to see two black guys fight, especially in an area that was mostly black people, that people preferred to see black and whites fight. But he believes that the story that they were telling with him and the Junkyard Dog could really sell out these buildings. And the belief was correct. The story that they put together set Mid-South on fire. So in July 1983, him and the Junkyard Dog really were down in the Superdome. This is where he was the most successful. He was very believable as a heel. He was loud. He was brash. He was big. Reed is 6'2", over 250 pounds. And the Junkyard Dog was no small man either. And Reed was known for basically talking junk. He would call him all sorts of names, calling him a field hand. He basically played the Muhammad Ali role. If you remember the Muhammad Ali stories that he would do to Sonny Liston, or he would do to some of his other opponents. That's basically what Butch Reed would do to the Junkyard Dog. He would call them the most offensive things, and he would tar and feather him. He would paint his back yellow. All of these sorts of insane things that he was doing to the Junkyard Dog, it drove people nuts that he became such a huge star in the state of Louisiana. In one famous story, Butch Reed tells that after he defeated the Junkyard Dogs to win the North American title, the highest honor you can win in Mid-South Wrestling, he actually had to use a gun to keep people away from him because they wanted to kill him so badly. This was one of numerous times that he says he's had to shoot his way out of fans attacking him. Most of the time, it would be racists trying to fight him. But in this situation, it was people who really loved the Junkyard Dog. He had to fire warning shots in the air in order to get people to back off of him because he had so much heat. Another fixture for his run in Mid-South Wrestling was his partnership with Buddy Landel. He often says that Buddy Landel is his brother, one of his favorite guys in the business. But he tells an incredible story of Buddy Landel calling him a nigger and him having to knock Buddy Landel out. And he says that Buddy Landel grew up with the Klan and was a Klan member, but he always laughs and says that, that's his brother. And basically that Buddy Landel had gotten drunk and called him a nigger once or twice, and so he had to knock him into a pool and punched him out or something like that. But that wasn't the only time. He also tells a story about John Nord. John Nord was not the barbarian, the berserker in the WWF. He he tells a story about Superstar Bill Dundee really winding up John Nord and telling John Nord, well, I guess this was around the time Butch Reed was about to leave the territory. And so John Nord was supposed to just go out there and beat him up. And Butch Reed was like, he had an ego. So he was like, nah, I'm a star here. You don't just come down here and eat me up. So he fought back. He still put Nord over, but he fought back a little bit more than Nord wanted him to. And they ended up fighting backstage. And he says he beat up John Nord backstage. And he said he didn't blame John Nord for it. He was a young guy who was being wound up by Superstar Bill Dundee. But this is just incredible stories that of this guy. I'm talking about how Bill Watts tried to fine him, but he told Bill Watts he was going to kick his ass. Bill Watts was notorious for fining guys for showing up late to shows and things like that. He also called Bill Watts a cheapskate and said he was a crook like all the other promoters, which is really interesting stuff. Another interesting story from Mid-South is the Battle of the Hacksaws, where his epic feud with Hacksaw Jim Duggan. There were two, basically the same guy. Hacksaw Jim Duggan, big dude, former football player, nicknamed Hacksaw, of course. Hacksaw Butch Reed, big dude, former football player. And during this whole thing, Reed in shoot interviews would say, Duggan had to name Hacksaw first, but him being a heel, he couldn't really just let the guy have it. But it was also a situation where he was great tag team with Jim the Anvil Neidhart, epic tag team there. It was really fun stuff to watch them, and then their breakup was actually pretty fun too. They feuded with the Rock and Roll Express and the different tag teams that came through Mid-South. It was a really fun time to see Reed and Neidhart work together. So famously, in 1986, he moves up to the WWF where he becomes the natural Butch Reed. This is where he dyed his hair blonde and became sort of the natural athlete. He would tell people he was a natural blonde. So he was there from 1986 to 1988. He didn't really do much, but the most famous story, of course, is that Butch Reed was supposed to be the first black Intercontinental Champion, but he was tired from all of the traveling, the 300 days a year traveling, and he took an extra day off, and that extra day was the day he was supposed to win the title. And so the Honky Tonk Man ended up keeping the belt. But and this was admitted by him. He says that, hey, they just never came back to him with it, and he was gone shortly thereafter. His most memorable matches, of course, were his WrestleMania matches. He wrestled Coco Beware at one WrestleMania. He wrestled Randy Savage at another. WrestleMania 4, he wrestled Randy Savage in the WWF Championship Tournament. He says his wife is a beautician who kept his hair dyed, and that one of the reasons why he left, not only because he was really tired from the travel was just too much, but also that the chemicals that they were putting in his hair was sort of killing his scalp, so his hair was getting thin. This idea, the blonde hair rather, was an idea that came from Ernie Ladd and Vince McMahon. And he says that he just didn't really care. He just kind of went with it. And over time, he actually did enjoy it, but he didn't want to stick with it and all of the scheduling and things like that. In 1989, he jumped back to WCW in the Crockett territory. He wrestled Sting at the Chi-Town Rumble in 1989 before famously joining up with Ron Simmons to form the tag team Doom. In this situation, Butch Reed was the veteran. His job was to bring Ron Simmons along, who was really green and really new to the business at the time. So they had some really good feuds with the Steiner brothers and the Road Warriors. And he talked about the physical style of Doom, and that the idea of Doom came from Dusty and Ole Anderson, and that the idea of them wearing the masks were also came from Dusty and Ole Anderson, and they were managed by a woman who was Nancy Sullivan, aka Nancy Benoit. So famously, he says that he didn't really like working with Sting and Lex Luger because they were both egotistical, and Luger did not like to work stiff, and that he famously says he didn't give a shit how Lex Luger liked to work. He was going to work the way he worked, and that's kind of why he didn't really want to work with them. Doom left when Doom broke up. That was pretty much the end of his notable national material. He did float around, do some other things for a little while before finally retiring. His life after wrestling consisted of him pretty much going back to the rodeos. He was always a big fan of rodeo. He's already been doing it a long time. And he just decided to do that and focus his energy on that. And he lived on a ranch, which he bought with the money he made from Mid South Wrestling, even though he says that Bill Watts was a cheapskate. But he was able to buy a ranch where he raised animals and was able to do the rodeo thing. But that was pretty much the end of his national exposure, is when Doom ended. So for the rest of his life, he pretty much did rodeos. And famously, he is one of the many names that were wrapped up in the CTE lawsuit against WWE in 2016. So it was thrown out in 2018. So Bruce Reed, or Butch Reed, hopefully now can be entered in the WWE Hall of Fame, or just be remembered by fans as being one of the most underrated professional wrestlers of all time. Um, Usually I like to give a playlist or some of my favorite things, but I think I mentioned everything that I liked here because I specifically loved the feud that he did with the Junkyard Dog. It was my favorite shit when I go back and watch the network. Unfortunately, a lot of those matches are not on the network because, well, the big matches, some of the build up stuff was there. And even some of the throwaway TV matches near the end of the feud where these guys were just beating each other on TV or beating each other up on TV after the money had been made. Those are really when you started putting those matches on TV. But you can probably find Junkyard Dog and Butch Reed on YouTube, like the Ghetto Street Fight or something like that is probably up on YouTube. And the Tar and Featherings was great shit. Like, it's legit good. Like when he held the guy down and painted his back yellow, that stuff was legit hilarious. It was really good stuff, man. Um, these guys were serious. These guys were serious, man. They were serious. But God bless Butch Reed. Thank you guys for listening. I'll talk to you guys later.
What could be sweeter than you?